News of the Times. The Pranzini murders. The killing of Marie Regnault. True crime in Paris in 1887. Today we travel to Paris in the spring of 1887, a city of elegance and spectacle, but also a city where public fascination with crime was reaching a fevered pitch. And it was on the quiet street of the Champs-Élysées, in an apartment thick with luxury, that one of the most unsettling mysteries of the age unfolded. A courtesan of considerable means, her loyal housekeeper, and a 12-year-old girl all found murdered behind locked doors, with no sign of struggle and no clear suspect. Only a handful of strange clues remained. A forced safe, a missing collection of jewels, and a cuff and belt marked with someone else's name entirely. In the days that followed, Paris would become a city gripped by rumour. Was the killer a jealous lover, or a foreign intruder, or someone the victims trusted enough to let inside? What begins as a domestic crime scene soon spiralled outward across France and beyond, as detectives pursued a suspect who seemed to slip through borders as easily as he slipped through identities. Tonight, we're piecing together the investigation, its gaps, its contradictions, and the remarkable social forces that shaped the fate of the man who eventually stood trial. This is the case of Henri Pranzini and the murders of the Rue Montaigne that shocked Paris and revealed far more about the world of 1880s France than anyone expected. And in today's end of episode, further particular segment, while Paris wrestled with the grim details of the Pranzini affair, another story, far less tragic but no less discussed, was bubbling away on the boulevard Haussmann. It concerned a delicatessen, an ambitious pâté, and an ingredient no cook has ever listed voluntarily. Let us simply say that when a customer reported his pâté contained something that was not quail, the matter escalated with remarkable speed. According to Le Petit Journal, the resulting scandal proved nearly as lively as the pigeon involved. With that culinary curiosity lingering in the air, we invite you to settle back, perhaps with a modest French aperitif to hand, possibly some crackers and pâté if you are brave, and allow yourself to be transported to Paris of the late 1880s. A world of elegance and shadow, of crowded boulevards and whispered scandals, where the police bureau smelled faintly of ink and tobacco, and where even the most ordinary household could conceal an extraordinary story. Tonight, we return to that world, and to a case that gripped it more fiercely than most. On the morning of the 17th of March 1887, the concierge of a handsome apartment building in the Rue Montaigne noticed something amiss. A courtesan who styled herself Regine de Montiel, her true name was Marie Regnault, had not pulled the check string at sunrise to indicate that a visitor should be quietly shown out. She was a woman of strict habits in a city that noticed such things, and by mid-morning concerned neighbours went upstairs when what they found would shock Paris. In her boudoir, at the foot of her bed, lay Marie Regnault, dead, her throat cut twice with deliberate force. In a nearby room, her housekeeper, Annette Gemeret, and the woman's young daughter, Marie, just 12 years old, had been killed in their bed, the child's head almost severed. Furniture and paintings showed no signs of struggle. Only a faint noise heard around 10 o'clock that morning suggested anything had occurred at all. There were, however, two objects out of place, a cuff and a belt marked with the name Gisler. The police, deprived of clear direction, seized upon the clue. Parisian newspapers announced that the killer must be a certain Gaston Gisler, and the first days of the hunt became tangled in speculation. The crime scene told its own story. A safe containing jewels valued at 200,000 francs had been attacked, but not breached. Whoever committed the murders had attempted to force it with insufficient skill. Money and smaller trinkets were missing, suggesting the killer had taken what could be easily carried and then fled. From the South Wales Echo, the 18th of March, 1887, a Parisian tragedy, wholesale murders by robbers. An appalling crime was perpetrated on Wednesday night at 17 Rue Montaigne in Paris, a street leading from the Rue du Faubourg at Saint-Honor to the Champs-Élysées. Among the tenants of that house was a woman who sometimes called herself Madame Regnault, and at other times Madame Monty. Her domestic establishment was an elegant one. She had in her service a woman cook who slept in a garret at the top of the house, and a femme de chambre who, with her daughter, occupied a room in Madame Monty's apartments. At about 8 o'clock this morning, the cook came down as usual to begin her day's work, but after unlocking the kitchen door, could not get in because the chain had not been taken down, as it usually was, by the chambermaid's daughter. The cook, whose name is Toulouse, rang several times, but as no one stirred, she went downstairs to make her morning purchases, and returned about an hour later. The chain still prevented her from entering the kitchen. She rang again, but the prolonged silence in the apartment alarmed the cook, who warned the police commissary, and he arrived at 11 o'clock, accompanied by a locksmith. On the door being forced open, Madame Monty was found in her nightdress lying on the floor at the foot of the bed, as if she had been murdered as she was stepping out of it. There was a large gash on each side of her throat. The room was not in disorder, and there were no traces of a struggle. A small iron strong box placed close to the bed had not been opened, but it was slightly stained with blood, as if the murderer had attempted to open it. No money was found by the police commissary, either in the victim's pockets or in any of the drawers or cupboards of the apartment. When opened, the strong box was found to contain jewels estimated to be worth about £8,000. In the chambermaid's room, the spectacle was perhaps even more terrible. It contained two beds, and each of them was occupied by a corpse. The woman had been killed by 2 blows with a chopper. Her skull had been split with 1 blow, and the artery on the left side of her throat severed with the second. Her daughter, a girl of 12 years of age, had been killed by 1 blow of the chopper, which had nearly severed the head from the body. Madame Monty was about 30 years of age, it appears, and was often accompanied home by strangers, by one of whom it was conjectured the triple murder was perpetrated. At 6 o'clock this morning, the people living in the apartment under that of Madame Monty heard an unusual noise overhead. An inquiry is being made, but no clue has yet been obtained to the identity of the murderer. To understand the crime on the Rue Montaigne, we must first understand the household in which it unfolded. A household that, like many kept by high-ranking courtesans in late 19th century Paris, combined luxury, secrecy, and a carefully managed domestic structure. Marie Regnault, also known as Regine de Montiel, Marie Regnault was not an ordinary Parisian woman. She belonged to the world of la grande horizontale, high-priced courtesans whose clientele included wealthy businessmen, aristocrats, diplomats, and military officers. These were women who lived outside conventional moral categories, neither socially respectable nor socially powerless. Their apartments reflected their status: fine furnishings, imported fabrics, original artwork, expensive tableware, the outward signs of discreet transactions with influential men. Marie Regnault was financially successful enough to maintain a fashionable, well-appointed flat on the Rue Montaigne, a maid, a second girl living in the home, and, intriguingly, in a locked safe containing jewellery valued at about 200,000 francs, an astonishing sum, equivalent to several million today. Annette Gremeret, the housekeeper. The second woman murdered, the older victim, was Annette Gremeret, Maria Regnault's housekeeper. Her duties would have included cleaning and maintaining the apartment, acting as go-between for deliveries and tradespeople, answering the door, especially in a household where discretion mattered, managing household purchases, ensuring clients were admitted or dismissed smoothly. Housekeepers in courtesans' apartments often acted as a protective buffer, the first and last person a visitor might see. Annette was respected and trusted by Regnault. She appears to have lived on the premises with her daughter. Marie Gremeret, the child, was Annette Gremeret's daughter named Marie. The child sometimes used Marie Regnault's surname at school. She attended a respectable convent-style school, unusual for a housekeeper's child, but not unheard of if the employee paid the fees. Regnault's will reportedly named the girl as a beneficiary, which fueled speculation she might be her own daughter. Some papers insinuated that courtesans often passed off their own children as servants' daughters for propriety, but this is conjecture, not evidence. She lived with her mother on the premises, was likely kept at a polite distance from the courtesan's professional activities, and was simply present in the household due to economic necessity. The murders occurred in two separate rooms. Marie Regnault in her boudoir, Annette and her daughter in their adjoining, smaller bedroom. The household structure and detail mattered to the investigation, as the household layout revealed key facts to the detectives. The killer had moved from room to room deliberately. He likely knew the apartment well enough not to grope in uncertainty. The lack of struggle suggested the victims knew their attacker. The domestic staff were killed not incidentally but systematically to remove witnesses. In the moralizing climate of 1880s France, as relayed in the English Victorian press, the presence of a courtesan, a servant and a child under one roof proved and provided the press with a ready-made tableau of sin, innocence and class tension. It was a household at the crossroads of three social worlds, and that made it ripe for scandal reporting. A suspect appears, but not the one expected. 4 days after the murders, while Paris police struggled, an Italian man newly arrived by night train had been arrested after offering jewellery to prostitutes in a local brothel. His name was Henri Pranzini. The items he tried to sell, a locket and a watch, bore an uncomfortable resemblance to the stolen possessions of the Rue Montaigne victims. A search of his belongings revealed blood-stained clothing, and amongst his papers were love letters, feminine garments, and small keepsakes from women across France and beyond. The police in Paris suddenly had a tangible suspect, and he was not the Greisler they had been seeking. Pranzini admitted knowing Marie Regnault, but insisted he had fled Paris only because he feared being entangled in the scandal. He had, he said, done nothing wrong. Henri Pranzini was born in Alexandria in 1856 to Italian parents. Pranzini grew up at the crossroads of empires. He spoke several languages, moved easily across borders, and seemed to slip in and out of occupations with remarkable fluidity. Postal clerk, interpreter to the Russian army, and then the British in Sudan and Afghanistan. Everywhere he went, there were whispers of dishonesty, but nothing that ever quite stuck. When he arrived in Paris in 1886, he arrived with no money, no prospects, and no fixed identity, but he possessed something far more valuable in the world he was about to enter: charm, good looks, and a talent for presenting whatever version of himself the moment required. He became what Parisians of the time called séducteur professionnel, a man who lived on the generosity of a woman who fancied themselves rescuers, companions, or partners. One such woman, Antoinette Sabatier, older, respectable, and employed in the millinery trade, did what loving partners have often done throughout history. She tried to give him stability. She brought him proper clothes, shoes, and a public polish he had never been able to achieve on his own. But as later police reports revealed, beneath the elegant suits she paid for, Pranzini was wearing shockingly ragged, filthy undergarments, the outward shine concealing the inward neglect. A telling metaphor for the man himself. From the Dublin Telegraph, the 16th of August, 1887. The detective officer Kicaldi and police commissionary court take up the thread of the narrative. Eugene Court, 42, disposes, on Sunday the 20th of March at about 7:30 in the evening, I received a visit from the under-housekeeper of a house of ill fame in the Rue Montaigne. She produced a lady's blue enamelled heart-shaped watch and a pair of turquoise earrings set with diamonds, stating they had been given by a stranger to two women of the house the previous night. This unexpected generosity from an unknown man excited my suspicions. He had claimed he found the jewels in the street, concluding a case of theft. I sent 2 detectives, each accompanied by one of the women, to the various places of amusement to look for the man. I meanwhile informed the commissary at the railway station. Toward 9 o'clock, I learnt that the man had been arrested at the theatre. I examined him and found wounds upon his hands, which he ascribed to the cold. Knowing through the papers of the crime in the Rue Montaigne, I suspected he might be connected with it. I told him to strip. He seemed surprised, but I insisted, saying it was the usual custom in Marseille. Laughter. We found that his underclothing in no way corresponded with his outward appearance. It was worn out, dirty, and in a simply disgusting state. I ordered him locked up for the night. Meanwhile, I learned his name was Pranzini, and that he had come from Paris on a pleasure trip, and that his only object in Marseille was to amuse himself. Having wired to Paris, I received information sufficient to charge him with the triple murder of the 17th. He turned deadly pale and exclaimed, "How dare you make such a horrible charge against me?" And that same afternoon, I searched the room he had taken at the Hotel du Noailles, and his bag contained very little. I took possession of a Soudan medal, stockings marked AS, a pair of trousers stained with blood, and a packet of love letters. We learned that he had spent the Saturday night with a woman of the town. She stated he had given her 20 francs, then taken them back in the morning, threatening to shoot her if she refused. On Sunday morning, he bought a watch and frightened the shopkeeper's wife by the strangeness of his manner. The case builds slowly. Evidence began to accumulate around him. On the 23rd of March, detectives revisited the apartment building and spoke to the watchmaker who lived downstairs. Shown the watch recovered at Marseille, he immediately recognized it and produced his work log. He had repaired the very same timepiece days before the murder, the matching serial number still scratched inside its case. 2 days later, jewels belonging to the dead courtesan were found discarded in a park Pranzini had visited. The net was tightening. But then an unexpected twist. Pranzini produced an alibi. He had been with his mistress, Madame Sabatier, on the night of the murders. When questioned on the 28th of March, she confirmed it. For a brief moment, doubt flickered. Had police seized upon the wrong man? The alibi collapses. Then came the letter. Early one morning, the examining magistrate received a note from Madame Sabatier. She was retracting her alibi. Pranzini had not been with her that night. More disturbingly, she now described his behaviour the following day. From the St. James Gazette, the 13th of July, 1887, the Pranzani trial. The most dramatic moment came when Mademoiselle Sabatier, Pranzani's lover, benefactor, and the woman who had once given him an alibi was called. Contemporary newspapers described her as tall, well-dressed, a woman of 50, visibly shaken, yet determined to tell the truth. She had first met Pranzini while leaving her place of business and, as she told the court, found him very presentable, well-educated, and intelligent. Over time, she lent him money, bought him clothing, and attempted to provide him with a steadier life. She explained that on the 18th of March, she was expecting to go to the theatre with him, but the tickets never arrived. He told her instead that he would spend the evening with friends. She saw nothing more of him until the following day. At first, she suspected nothing. They dined together, went to the circus, and returned to her rooms, where the tone of the evening abruptly shifted. As she recounted, he suddenly began to cry. I asked him what was the matter. I saw blood last night, he told her. I was in a woman's house at 1 in the morning. Someone knocked at the door. That is my lover, she cried. You must hide in the press. And then he killed her. In court, Pranzini denied ever making such a confession, but Sabatier's account continued. The next morning, he showed her a newspaper report of the Montaigne murders and said, "You see what I told you? It's quite true. He begged for money to leave Paris, and she pawned her own jewellery to finance his ticket to Marseille." When police later questioned her, she initially claimed out of fear of or loyalty that he had been in London. But once confronted with a telegraph proving he was under arrest in Marseille, she admitted the truth. And on the 25th of March, she wrote to the magistrate, "My conscience compels me to confess the truth. Pranzini was not in my house on the night in question." The court then heard an account of her earlier confrontation with him during the investigation. She had, according to the president, fallen to her knees, imploring him in the name of his love for her and for his mother to tell the truth. His reply was unchanged. "I have nothing to do with the affair." At this point in the courtroom, the president noticed tears on the prisoner's face. "Hold up your head, Pranzini. You are crying." "Yes," he replied, "I am crying at the remembrance of my mother. Mademoiselle Sabatier deceives herself." The president then invited her to look at him one last time. Gripping the rail, she turned to face him. Pranzini held her gaze. "Do not try to fascinate her, Pranzini," the president warned. "I am simply looking at her," he answered. "Must I cast down my eyes?" With this exchange, her examination concluded. The courtroom, by all accounts, was silent. Antoinette Sabatier. Antoinette Sabatier was, by all available accounts, a respectable working woman in her late 40s or early 50s. Tall, well-dressed, and carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone long accustomed to managing her own affairs. She lived alone and earned her living in the Paris millinery trade, an industry of exacting standards and modest wages, where skill with ribbon, wire, and fashionable trimmings could mean the difference between steady work and none at all. Women in her profession were often independent out of necessity. They worked long hours, knew the value of reliability, and tended to present themselves with care, traits entirely consistent with the way Sabatier was described by police and journalists. Her involvement with Henri Pranzini appears to have been one of genuine attachment. She provided him with clothing, meals, and companionship, and seems to have believed him capable of better than the rootless life he had been living before arriving in Paris. When the murders on the Rue Montaigne shook the city, Sabatier initially attempted to shield him, giving him an alibi she later admitted was untrue, a retraction that came only after considerable pressure from investigators. A knife seller soon approached the police with another troubling account. A well-dressed foreigner had purchased a small knife, then returned moments later to exchange it for a much larger butcher's knife. The description matched Henri Pranzini. From the Guernsey Star, the 14th of July, 1887. The trial of Pranzini. Great sensation was caused in court by the cross-examination of the cutter who sold Pranzini a formidable butcher's knife on the 4th of March. Though great efforts were made to get him to show uncertainty, he maintained in the most absolute manner that the man to whom he sold the knife was Pranzini and no other. The prisoner turned deadly pale, and when asked by the judge what he had to say, could say nothing but say, he lies. The butcher's knife shown to the doctor, and exactly like the one purchased by Pranzini a few days previous to the murder, was, the doctor asserted, a weapon with which the wounds could have been made, and Pranzini was a man strong enough to have inflicted them. The trial of the century. On the 9th of July 1887, the trial opened in a courtroom packed well beyond capacity. Witnesses described the luxurious apartment, the murdered woman, and the trinkets Pranzini had carried to Marseille. The judge took evident delight in reading aloud the defendant's love letters, cultivating the image of a man whose morals, background, and foreignness made him capable of anything. His mistress, Madame Sabatier, respectable, employed, and plainly in love, testified reluctantly. She now stated under oath that Pranzini had not been with her on the night of the murders, and that he had confessed privately to being present in Ragnall's apartment at the time. The defendant claimed he was with a society lady, but refused to name her. His story about hiding in a corridor armoire failed to convince. Tenants had heard cries and thuds. How could he not? From the St. James Gazette, the 9th of July 1887, the trial of Pranzini. Pranzini, who is accused of the triple murder in the Rue Montaigne, will commence in Paris today. Monsieur Henri du Brevel, the Chief Justice, has received 4,000 applications for seats in the court. There were at most only 400 to give away. Heavy bets are being laid on the result of the trial in several of the clubs. A Paris paper publishes a series of letters from ladies of good families to the murderer, Pranzini. The first is from an American young lady, the second is from an English woman, and the third from an intellectual and refined Parisienne, who threatened that she would commit suicide if Monsieur Goulion, the prosecuting magistrate, revealed her name. In each case, the female admirer mistook Pranzini for a romantic and ideal hero. The French woman had just asked him to her house when she was informed by the police of the murder. The case against Pranzini. When the trial opened, the courtroom was so crowded that Parisian papers claimed a seat was as difficult to secure as a ticket to the opera. Reporters from Britain followed every detail with equal enthusiasm. The prosecution presented a chain of evidence that, if not always elegant, was undeniably substantial. From the Sporting Times, the 17th of September, 1887. 1. The jewellery trial. Several days after the murders, a cook from a Marseille brothel presented police with jewellery of a lady's quality given to two women by a stranger the previous evening. The pieces were quickly identified as belonging to the murdered courtesan Marie Regnault. More jewels were later discovered thrown down the latrines at Longchamp, another blow to the defence. 2. The flight from Paris. Pranzini left Paris abruptly the morning after the murders, travelling south with unusual haste. The prosecution leaned heavily on this, suggesting conscious escape rather than coincidence. 3. The injuries. When arrested, Pranzini bore scratches on his hands and a deep, fresh wound on his thigh. He claimed they were caused by the cold. The court did not find this persuasive. 4. Blood-stained trousers. Police seized trousers from his luggage, marked with what appeared to be blood. The substance could not be decisively analysed by 1887 standards, but visually it was undeniable. 5. The knife purchase. A butcher testified that only days before the murders, Pranzini had bought a knife with a good strong blade to cut wood if necessary, an explanation the prosecution described as imaginative. 6. The false beard. A hairdresser reported that Pranzini had inquired about a false beard shortly before the crime, an attempt, the prosecution argued, to disguise himself during or after the murders. 7. His knowledge of the crime. One of the most damaging points came from Madame Sabatier. She testified that after the murders, but before the police released any details, he told her, "I saw blood last night," and described 3 women lying dead. It was impossible for him to have known these specifics unless he had been present. Pranzini's advocate, Mathieu Demange, delivered that even sympathetic papers described as an elegant argument in an impossible cause. He conceded that his client might be a thief, perhaps even a cad, but insisted he was no murderer. The killer, he argued, must have been an unknown intruder, one who entered unseen, killed 3 people, attempted but failed to break into the safe, stole only lightweight valuables, and vanished without leaving a trace, while Pranzini slept peacefully elsewhere. It was a story the jury struggled to accept. From the St. James's Gazette, the 13th of July, 1887, the Pranzini trial. The trial of Pranzini for the murders in the Rue Montaigne was continued in the parish assize court on Monday. No one having come forward to answer to the judge's appeal to save Pranzini by declaring where he had passed the night of the crime, the judge once more pressed the prisoner to state where he was, the answer being the same as that made on Saturday, to the effect that he could not disclose it for fear of compromising a lady's reputation. The judge said, "I note the complete absence of any explanation. It is your own condemnation." On the 13th of July, the jury retired. They returned 45 minutes later with a verdict of guilty, and the sentence was death. The execution, and a curious footnote. Pranzini pursued 2 appeals. Both failed. By the end of August, all France awaited his execution at La Roquette. In the town of Lisieux, 200 kilometers away, a 14-year-old girl named Thérèse Martin, later known to the world as Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, decided to pray for the condemned man, who she believed to be impenitent and in grave danger of damnation. She begged for a sign of repentance. At dawn on the 31st of August 1887, Pranzini was led from his cell as the chapel bell tolled. At the foot of the scaffold, his composure faltered. He turned suddenly, seized the priest's crucifix, and kissed the wounds of Christ 3 times. Moments later, at 2 minutes past 5, the blade fell. When Teresa opened the newspapers the next morning, she read of the gesture and wept with relief. In her memoir, she wrote, "My prayer was granted to the letter." Aftermath and scandal. The story, however, did not end with the guillotine. Pranzini's body was dissected for anatomical study. Portions were sent to medical schools, and in a grotesque epilogue, several police officers were discovered to have fashioned card cases from strips of his skin, an act that triggered a political scandal reaching as far as the President of France. From the Ulster Echo, the 19th of September, Pranzini's skin. Another incredible story concerning the murderer Pranzini is published in the Paris papers. It is said that a tradesman whose name and address are given was called upon by a gentleman who asked him to make a couple of card cases out of a piece of skin which he laid upon the counter. The tradesman immediately saw that the skin was human, but his horror and surprise were increased on his being informed that it was of that of Pranzini, and the order was, however, executed and paid for. The murders on the Rue Montaigne, however their straightforward criminal character, had peeled back something deeper in French society: racial fear, anxiety about shifting female independence, and the uneasy sense of a nation grappling with its own identity. Whether Pranzini truly matched the monstrous image shaped by press and prejudice, or whether he was simply the easiest man to condemn, remains a question historians continue to examine. What is certain is that in the spring and summer of 1887, Paris found in Henri Pranzini a villain whose life, trial, and death illuminated far more than a single crime. It revealed a society wrestling with class, empire, morality, and the unsettling presence of the other within its own boulevards. Further particulars. In the late summer of 1887, while Paris was preoccupied with the Pranzini affair, another scandal, admittedly of a far less homicidal nature, but every bit as dramatic, unfolded in a delicatessen on the boulevard Haussmann. Le Petit Journal, the 14th of August, 1887. The Great Pâté Scandal of the Boulevard Haussmann, 1887. An incident of gastronomic nature has recently occupied the attention of residents in the quarter. For several days, Monsieur Lefebvre, a proprietor of a delicatessen of modest reputation, has advertised a new pâté de gibier with truffle. The article, sold at a most advantageous price, attracted numerous customers. On the third day of sale, Madame Bouton, a competing merchant, publicly declared that no pâté containing real truffle could be offered at such a sum. This remark provoked an exchange of words between the two tradespeople, during which Monsieur Lefebvre affirmed the integrity of his preparation, invoking somewhat injudiciously the honour of his late aunt. Shortly thereafter, a client presented himself as the commissariat with the remainder of a pâté purchased that morning. Upon cutting the article, the gentleman had discovered not quail as advertised, but a small pigeon, entire and described as in a disgruntled state. A municipal inspector visited the establishment. Several tins were seized for examination. 2 were consumed during the inspector's luncheon. His official report concludes that the substance is not injurious to health, although unusual. Monsieur Lefebvre has been fined for inaccurate labelling and instructed that the product be henceforth sold under the designation pâté à la improuve. Public interest has been considerable, and despite the affair, sales of the pâté have increased. As to how the pigeon entered the mixture, no determination has been reached. Residents of the quarter advance various theories, none of which have yet been verified. And with that, the red-coated ferrets of the News of the Times headquarters, who moonlight as our official timekeeping division, are now standing in a row, tapping their tiny pocket watches with growing impatience. A sure sign, if ever there was one, that our tale must draw to a close. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, amateur collector of imaginary semaphore flags, part-time cartographer of completely fictional islands, and once the proud owner of a harmonium that only played in E flat if threatened. Wishing you a peaceful evening, and may you remember far more reliably than we do to extinguish the hallway candle before it sets fire to the hat stand. Until next time.